Hello, everyone. I have Jim McKelvey with us today, who you probably already know, but he's the co-founder of Square and founder of Invisibly. He is a serial entrepreneur. No joke. He started at least 7 companies. I don't know what the number is. I'll have to ask him. Ranging from a CD cabinet maker to a glass blowing studio. I think, hold on. Here we go. Hey everyone, I have Jim McKelvey with us today. He is the co-founder of Square and founder of Invisibly. If you've already heard this, then I apologize, but we had some technical difficulties, and now it's saying that I'm live. He is a serial entrepreneur, and I think I've coined this. He's a creative, he's an innovative, he's an artist, and he's an entrepreneurial engineer. I'll have to ask if that's a fair title. He is also the author of the Innovation Stack, which details Square's battle with Amazon to create a better payment system. And yes, he basically went to war with Amazon. They were fighting a war. I don't know if he was fighting a war, and he won. But I'm still voting for a comic book version of that story. And I love the comic book you have out, Jim, right now. And I appreciate your artistic representation of innovation as well. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. And yeah, look, I didn't want to write a business book. I wanted to write a comic. And the stories that I tell actually lend themselves to sort of pen and ink pretty well. So I did the whole thing as a comic. But I wrote the whole book basically because I met with Herb Kelleher, who was the founder of Southwest Airlines. And he sort of challenged me to take these ideas that I had and share them with the world. And I thought the best way to do that was a comic book because I didn't want to write a business book because I think they're really boring. But then when I finished the comic and told Herb about it, he hated the idea of being portrayed as a comic character. Like so he basically said, well, if you're going to do it that way, just leave me out. And I wasn't going to leave Herb Kelleher out of the story. So I rewrote it as a business book. So there are no cartoons there, but if you go to jimmckelvey.com, you can get a free copy of the comic version of the thing. It's just,
I mean, it's beautiful. Do you create beautiful artistic pieces of glass, but do you also draw? Is that you?
I don't draw this well, so I partnered up with Trevor Goring, who used to be a DC comic. He's drawn a lot of superheroes. Trevor's awesome, so he did the graphics, and we did the story together, and got to have some fun with this. So,
and I just love, I mean, that is innovative in itself, because how many business books are there on the market? And you're going to do a creative representation of it.
Yeah, I thought so. But, actually in hindsight, Herb was right, because the comic format, so the graphic novel format, is really good for hero stories. And if you look at the protagonist, it's usually always somebody with something that we don't have. They've got superpowers, or they got bitten by that spider. There's always something that differentiates the superhero from the normal person. Even Batman, right? Like Batman's just like impossibly rich, right? But there's no sort of normal superhero. And the funny thing was, I was trying to tell this story about how entrepreneurship is really this thing that's accessible by normal folks. And so the graphic novel format would have been absolutely the worst thing, because it would have essentially perpetuated the hero myth, which is explicitly in my book one of the things that I'm attacking. So Herb really, I mean, look, he called me out and I was sort of pissed when he first did it. But then in hindsight, I realized that the man was correct. And I think probably saved me from myself.
Yeah, that resonates with something I've heard you say before, is that, the most innovative ideas don't come from the people that are usually the most knowledgeable.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that's a controversial statement. So let me sort of explain what I mean. If you look at innovation, there's sort of 2 types. There's this sort of incremental improvement. Like, we keep getting things better and better and better. Like, here's a pen, right? This pen it's better than the pens I grew up with. It's got this nice squishy rubber grip, and they probably improved the ink, and maybe it's cheaper to make, and I don't know, maybe it's more environmental, but like, it's probably a better pen because we've gotten better at making pens over the last 1,000 years. But then there are the sort of innovations that are sort of massive leaps forward. And that's what I study in the book. Those big ones. And they're made in a different way. And those are typically made by people who are not experts because they can't be. What I mean by this is that if you're going to do something that mankind has never done before, by definition, you are not an expert. By definition, you can't be good at something that hasn't been done before. So, the Wright brothers created the first airplane, and then, Orville and Wilbur flipped a coin to see who was going to fly it for the first time. And neither one of them was qualified to fly that plane. I mean, they built it, but, there was never a pilot in human history. So neither one of them were as qualified as, a typical pilot today would have been trained and schooled and, drug tested. But if you're going to do something for the first time, by definition, you are not qualified.
So in terms of the Wright brothers, their innovation wasn't really, I think people didn't know, they weren't amazed by it initially, from what I understand about the story. And so does innovation come with this? People won't get it, even if you're successful?
It really does. It's amazing. So, for instance, when I was starting Square with Jack, we were sort of dumbfounded at how many people didn't realize we were doing what we were doing. Like, we were showing them this new thing and they ignored it, it's actually one of the reasons why when I designed the Square Reader, I chose this really, really small, narrow format, which actually doesn't read a credit card very well. The credit card tends to rock as it moves through this device. And I could have easily solved that by just making it wider. But the problem with that is that the wider device, and I actually made wider ones, but when we tested them, nobody was impressed. Like, they just ignored it because they'd seen credit cards read forever by wide tracked devices. But when I showed them the small device, they were sort of blown away. And so it really helped, because one of the most frustrating things about building something truly innovative is that it takes a long time for people to even notice. And so actually, I'm sort of fascinated with this idea of objects that demand attention. And like today, like this month, I've been in the glass studio just feverishly working on these drinking glasses, which, I mean, if you can see, I don't know if you can see the rim of that glass, like that's really difficult it's got all these waves in it. Like, if you pour a scotch in here and you ignore this glass, this glass will attack you, right? It's just this evil vessel. But what I wanted to do was I wanted this object to sort of pull your attention back to this thing. So you're not just, sort of thoughtlessly tossing back whiskey, that it sort of brings your focus in. So I'm literally now in the studio making these, sort of experimental glasses that demand attention, because one of the problems, as you rightly noted, if you invent something, people sometimes just never notice.
Yeah. And I want to ask you, so before I forget, well, then how do you know when to keep going with an innovative idea? But because this resonates too with an article I think you wrote in terms of, get in the boat. And it's, so before that though, I want to say, so I didn't drink for a very large portion of my life. I wanted to be a professional athlete. I played soccer.
Okay.
And so I said no to parties, and that impacted my social ability. That's a whole nother story. Right. But when I did start drinking, it wasn't maybe a couple. I mean,
soccer players, man, you guys are a tough lot. But okay.
But I never really drank to get drunk, and I drank to, and it's not usually a lot of alcohol. It's hard to appreciate, but I got into whiskey.
Okay.
But recently, I also have been drinking Fernet a lot, and Fernet is a very bitter liqueur. Uh-huh. And people are like, why do you drink that? And I say, well, one, it doesn't taste that great. It tastes unique, so I pay attention to it and I enjoy it more because it's the experience. And I think that when I see your glasses, I think about that. Is it would bring me back to the experience. That's
the thing. And, actually, shoot me an email. I'll send you a glass. You can try it out with your thing. I'd love your opinion on one of these things. Amazing. But look, we're so distracted right now. Like, there's so many things that you can kind of get through without paying full attention. Like, especially now that we've all got COVID, right? We're zooming in, like I'm naked from the waist down. Nobody can tell, like this is the day we live where we don't even have to commit to the meeting or the person we're meeting to, we can just sort of, zoom it in. And I think there's a loss because some of the things we do demand our focus. And like these days, my car drives itself. I don't even have to pay attention when I'm driving. So I thought about, like, could I make an object that somehow pulls the focus of the person back to what they're doing? And I've been fanatical about these things. Like I put a lens in the bottom so that it's,
oh wow,
like there's this perfect 3-inch radius lens here. I've spent, God, probably 6 months just in the studio, just making. I've made hundreds of these things, and I'm just obsessed with trying to create a vessel that pulls your attention back. Maybe nobody wants to use. I don't care if anyone wants to.
I mean, there's so many ideas in there, though. It's also as an entrepreneur, does your idea draw attention? Does it cause people to focus in? As an entrepreneur, does your business cause you to focus in and draw your attention? There's so many different. I'm just pulling different lessons from your glass that you might not intend.
Well, this is what art is. It's they ask questions, and I don't think we give any answers, but we're trying to ask questions and stimulate conversation. And I don't know that it'll do that, but if you get drunk, maybe you'll start talking.
Well, this is potentially where innovation comes. It comes from doing things you probably don't normally do and getting lost in them, and then seeing where they don't work, and then possibly finding solutions.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I noticed this interesting parallel in all these companies that I studied because, so I lived through Square, and Square got attacked by Amazon, as you noted. But we survived, which was sort of amazing to me. And then I went looking for other companies because I was so surprised when we survived an attack by Amazon. We were just a startup at the time. And Amazon kills everything in its path. When Amazon copies your product and undercuts your price and adds the Amazon brand, you're dead. Like, that's 100% true, except in Square's case, right? And so I felt really weird because I couldn't explain what happened. So I started looking for other companies that had the same sort of journey. That's what led me to Herb Kelleher and Southwest, because Southwest was viciously attacked by the other airlines when they were just a startup. And so it turns out history is full of examples of these companies who had, sort of stumbled on this thing. I called it an innovation stack, but it was this thing that just looked different than other businesses. And I was like, well, what's different? What's different? And I finally realized that, oh, wait a second. These people weren't trying to be innovative. They were trying to survive. Like, innovation was this last resort. They had already exhausted all of the easy solutions, and they were still in trouble. So they went to the last thing, which was like, oh God, I can't look it up on YouTube. I can't get a expert in here. So I got to figure it out myself. And it was that sort of last moment of self-reliance and that chaos of building something new that led these companies to become, world leaders. Like the biggest bank in the world was started by 15-year-old. Well, I'm sorry, he was a 30-year-old a kid who dropped out of school at 15, became a produce vendor, sold lettuce. No experience in the banking world, built the biggest bank on the planet. The most successful financial institution in the history of mankind was built by a produce vendor. Didn't know anything about banking, and it's this weird situation. And I thought somebody's got to talk about this. So
that brings up for me, because I mentor a lot of high school students, a lot of college students, and a lot of the questions I get, because I work in the career development space, is how do I pick the right career? How do I know what to invest my time in? How do I ensure that this is the most meaningful thing? How do I ensure I don't miss out on anything? But when I hear you talk about innovation, it comes from it wouldn't have made sense. Like if I saw you blowing glass in the factory, I never would have thought that you would have founded Square. I think you see that repeatedly.
Well, yeah. A lot of it is not being too wedded to our stereotypes. Like, we all have stereotypes, and stereotypes are really good because they get us through the world quickly. Like, I have a stereotype of, what the cop is going to say when he pulls me over. I have a police model, and I have stereotypes for everything. But then the question is, if something is different, can you discard it very quickly? Up to including, I mean, that's how I started working with Jack Dorsey. I mean, I hired Jack when he was 15 years old to come work at one of my companies. And when he was 15 years old, he was really good. So we struck up this really powerful business relationship where we would work together. And I didn't care that he was 15, and he didn't care that I was, whatever age I was. I guess I would be 26. And we were, a good team. And if I'd had this bias of like, oh, kids in high school can't do professional level work, well, then we never would have, met. So I think part of the advice that I would sort of offer, to your students is acknowledge your biases and then be able to, sort of quickly detach from them when you get counter evidence. And a lot of times you'll find that what you think you should be doing is not what you want to do. That's what led me to become an artist. I'm trained as an engineer. I'm trained as an economist. I never studied art in school. It was just this thing that I basically was forced to do to pay the rent. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, actually I'm pretty good at this. So it kept going.
It's interesting what you can find out about yourself when you just dive into it. Like do the thing that you're doing really well and pay attention along the way. And like you said, don't be attached to it, and then be willing to move into different paths if they show up. How did you recognize that Jack had talent, by the way? Like, how do you know that he was good as a 15-year-old?
Oh, well, I mean, I just started noticing this pattern of give him work to do and he'd do it really well. And then I saw this pattern and I thought, well, how deep does this river run? So I kept giving him harder and harder work and he kept doing it really well. So one day I pulled him aside. I was like, what do you really like doing? He's like, well, I really like programming computers. I was like, oh, well, let's have you build this software. So he basically rewrote the company's flagship product the summer of his junior year in high school. And that to this day is still sort of part of the core of Mira's product offering. Like it's still sort of, I'm not sure all of Jack's code is there, but like bits of it are probably still languishing on some server stack somewhere. I think the trick with that was just be willing to accept the fact that a kid who can't drive yet is able to do really wonderful work. And it was obvious. I mean, like it's especially if you're in business, you'll notice that most people turn in pretty mediocre stuff. Most work is pretty mediocre. So when somebody turns in great work, it's, at least to me, something that you should celebrate. And who cares how old they are or what they look like?
What you just said about mediocre and great work, as some people probably listening and they're in a job, maybe they want to be an entrepreneur, they're working in a business or working in a job. Like, how do they, I guess, what is the difference between great work and good work? And is that something that you can define just so generally, or does it really just depend on what the work is at the time?
So I'd say there are a couple of things. And the most profound I'll credit to Jim Collins, who I met at a conference 20 years ago when he was writing Good to Great. And he gave me an advanced copy of Good to Great so I could review it. And we talked a little bit. And the thing that I took away was he said, good is the enemy of great. We tend to not have great relationships because we have good relationships. Good becomes this sort of space filler. Like you probably eat good food. You probably don't eat great food, but the food is good enough. So who cares? You probably have a good education. You probably didn't get a great education because it was all right. Like it did what it needed to, and if you look at what happens in the world, we typically have mostly good things in our lives. Occasionally we'll have a great thing, but usually that space for greatness is already occupied by something that's good. And so in order to have great, you have to take this risk of not accepting good. And that's very tough to do. How many people are you going to turn down for a job before you finally say, look, I need somebody to do this. And we don't actually need great accounting. We need good accounting. Good accounting will suffice. You're hired, but we get into this habit of just, accepting good by default. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is that great is sometimes unnecessary, and it can be extremely expensive if you're fanatical about greatness. So that's sort of the counter argument, which is, oh, you know, let's not fill our life with mediocre good stuff, or good stuff, but where we could have great stuff. But also, you know, on the flip side, recognize that sometimes you don't need great. You just need good and get it out the door. So that's what I tell people, especially if they're launching their first product. Your first product is not going to be great. Your first product is going to be like I've made 300 of these things, okay, and they're barely passable now. And I probably get 200 or 300 away from actually having something that, you know, may approach great or good, or I don't know. They're kind of.
I personally think those are great. Like,
you haven't used them yet. You haven't like poured, you know, cognac down your shirt. But you know, the idea here is that sometimes you don't need excellence, and so recognize the balance. And then this is sort of my whole argument with the book. I basically make this big 300-page argument that says, look, you're going to spend most of your life copying everything that everybody else does. Fine. No judgment here. As a matter of fact, you can have a great life and never do anything original. Don't do anything original. Start your own company, become a billionaire, fly jets, you know, climb Everest. Guess how many people have been up Everest? Lots of people have been up Everest. You can probably have somebody carry you the first 2/3 of the way. You know, you don't have to be original. You can have a great life. But why would you limit yourself to just that? Like, what if 5 times in your life, 10 times in your life, you were going to be presented with some problem that the world has never solved? And you have the capacity to do it. You don't know you have it, but you think, oh, I might be able to do this thing. Well, do you want to always have to say no to that? Or do you want to be prepared in some way to go, oh, wait a second, this is one of those problems where I don't get to copy the solution. So proceeding is going to be way different than the way I'm used to working, but I can still do it. And that's the sort of big message in the innovation stack, which is that, look, it's different to innovate. It's different. And it's not this thing that's always glorious and cool. It's, in fact, pretty lonely and terrifying, but people can still do it. And the funny thing is, it's not the hero story. It's not something that you would make a comic book about. It's something that would be a boring business book, which is basically like, you boring person, you know, who's headed a lot of soccer balls, you know, you too can, you know, you can do this. Like, you know, and I mean, Jack and I had no qualifications for starting Square, 0, you know, it doesn't really matter. I'm sorry to make funny of soccer, but my son plays and just scrambles his head. But it's wonderful to think that all of us, as just sort of normal folks, have this potential, if we are willing to do stuff that hasn't been done before, to have these like dramatic results.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like you can't seek innovation. You have to just do the things that you love doing and hope to find a problem that you can't solve.
Yeah.
And then be empowered to actually go take action on that, which I feel like is just a whole nother story.
Yeah. You don't seek it, because seeking innovation, what that'll lead to is blue specks in the laundry detergent. That's how I describe the problem. It's like somebody at some detergent company said, oh, we need to make a new detergent. And they're like, our detergent's fine. It's like, well, the marketing department needs something new. It's like, well, why don't we put some blue specks in there? And they're like, cool. You know, does it help? You know, that's innovation for innovation's sake. And I'm saying, look, innovation should be a last resort, but it should be the last resort. It shouldn't be like, okay, I'm never going to do that. And that, unfortunately, is so many people's attitude, because we tend to have this sort of fantasized version of innovation, which is, you know, some genius in a lab or some person who's smarter or braver or whatever than we are. If you actually look at history, the great innovations, many of them were made by just normal folks who were out of options.
I just thought of a fun little party game. Look around your home and find products that were innovative. And was every product innovative at some time? I think potentially.
Yeah. So I'd take your party game and I'd add a challenge for it. Also try to find a product that's over innovative. Okay. Where they peaked and then they went past it and it started to go. I'll give you an example. So my wife and I, like, we bought a fancy dishwasher. I've always had Maytag dishwashers, which are frankly the best dishwasher I've ever owned was a Maytag. Just throw your dishes in, don't worry about it. Now we've got this Miele, friggin' beautiful 4,000. It's a really expensive dishwasher. Pain in the ass. Pain in the ass. It's got this separate thing. You got to place every like knife and fork into the top. There's a separate rack in it. Like I used to be able to just take the silverware, dump it in. It would come out clean, pull it out with my hand. Now I have to it's like somebody overthought the dishwasher. My dishwasher sucks. Like I would trade it out in a second for a decent Maytag. I should probably do that this weekend. They've over innovated. I've heard that Tesla has decided to remove the steering wheel and put in a yoke, like a plane has. That's a disaster. Because you don't, like planes, you turn like that. That's about the amount of control input you use in a plane. Like I do this when I'm backing into a spot. I'm not going to, they've overthought it. So look for stuff. Look for stuff that is past its peak. See how much innovation you really want.
Oh, that would be fun. Now I just feel like I need to go buy things that are just don't make sense just to have them in the house too.
Yeah. Yeah. Think about your objects. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you always a creative and artist, by the way?
I thought you were going to say asshole. I thought you were.
No. I think you're a really nice guy. But something I've been thinking about. I feel like, art and creativity is integrated in at least the stories that I've heard, almost everything that you've done. And, did that show up when you were younger, or is that something you only did because you needed to make some money and get by?
No. Most of my life, I've been a boring, pretty normal, follow the herd person. The only things that I've done that are really creative have been these, sort of transient moments where, okay, I don't have a payment system that allows me to get paid. And my friend Jack wants to start a new company, so we start Square. Okay. That was sort of a neat moment. And then, we worked on it for a couple of years to get it going, but I was not I've not had this, this sort of life of innovation. I've had moments where I've said somebody's got to do something about this. So I had a situation of one of my coworkers' sons was murdered and shot while he was delivering a pizza in a bad part of town. So I live in St. Louis, and we got a lot of stuff going on here. And my coworker came in, and he was just, I mean, you can imagine how distraught somebody would be to have their son murdered. And we were talking about it. I couldn't offer this guy any consult, but he sparked this thing in me. I was like, what can I do about this? Like, what can I do about my town? And I felt powerless. I felt like nobody's doing anything about this. We got the highest murder rate in the country. So I drove up to where the shooting happened, and I looked around, and I was like, this place is horrible. Like, this is not the St. Louis that I know. I live out in the suburbs where it's really nice. And this was the north part of the city, which is really sort of terrifying. And I thought, if I lived in the north part of the city, I might think differently about taking a human life. Like I don't know because I don't live there and I don't pretend to know, but I would imagine that they would think differently than I think. And so, I thought about, well, what could we do to, maybe help this part of the city? And, my solution was, well, I know we need a lot of programmers, and I know it's not that hard to become a programmer. And I know that if you have a brain that works a certain way, you can become a programmer pretty easily. So I just opened up a programming school. It's called Launch Code, and we'll give you a free education and get you a good job. And we've had about 5,000 people go through it now. It's working great, But so there's the innovation, and it was this, it's got its innovation stack. Launch Code is not just free training and stuff. It's a lot of job placement, a lot of skills. It's like we have about a dozen things that we do differently than other programs, which is why it works. But that's not the point. The point is that moment of frustration, which was caused literally by a murder, led to this thing that, has been positive. But that again was, I guess that was 4 years after I started Square. So it was like Square, little spike in the graph, nothing, launch code, little spike in the graph where, for 3 months, we're working furiously trying to get, the problem, by the way, is not training programmers. The problem is getting them jobs because they don't have a credential that the employers will trust. Right. So the whole trick with launch code wasn't training, it was job placement. So we had to solve the job placement thing.
Yeah, potentially building partnerships, right? That trusted your curriculum and your brand.
Took forever, and we had to have all these tricks to get people placed. It's just a bunch of trickery to get them placed. Once they're placed, the companies love them, and then I hired more, and it works. My innovation record is pretty much 0, 0, 0, 0. Spike 0, 0. It looks like a heartbeat, except with a really slow pulse.
Yeah, and I hear again there, it's live your life. An issue comes up that you care about.
Yeah.
Feel empowered to take action on the solution, and potentially find people that know parts of it maybe more than you, and find a team and support system. Yeah.
It can all be done. It's actually not that difficult. I mean, having lived through it now, half dozen times, it's scary, but it's not something that a normal person can't do. Just like if you were, in a shipwreck and had to survive for a while, you could probably do it. Like you have some basic survival skills that you've just never had to use because you've always had food provided and shelter and all stuff like that. Well, if you had to, you'd probably be pretty good at it, but you don't have to, so you're never tested.
Yeah. If you make the decision, if you commit, then you'll figure out ways to make things work because that's your survival.
Correct. Yeah.
So this has been incredible. Thank you, Jim. Where can our listeners find you? Where can they get the Innovation Stack?
So Innovation Stack should be available all the places books are sold. You can get a free copy of the comic at jimmckelvey.com. And look, I'm not trying to plug my book here. I'm trying to plug the ideas in the book, which is a little bit different. So I'm okay. Well, I mean, Penguin's probably not okay if you steal a copy, but I'm fine with that. I just want the ideas out there because what I wanted to do was to get more talent off the sidelines, because if we can have 1 million people who otherwise would have hesitated when they had the opportunity to solve a problem, take that first step and try it, then we will have, thousands and thousands of new solutions. Notice I didn't say millions, right? Most of you will still fail. That's how the game is, right? These are not guaranteed solutions, but the ones who succeed will be hugely helpful for the planet, and that's what we need. I think we need more people who are willing to go, well, that's wrong, and I want to do something about it. And even though I can't find somebody else who solved this problem, I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah, and even if you do fail, I feel like you've created traits within yourself, developed them to make it more possible in the future, and you've probably raised awareness around a specific problem and issue, and you probably then are probably going to be more successful when you go copy an idea, which is what most ideas are.
Yes, and you will actually be more entertaining because everyone likes failure stories. Like if you totally screw something up, you are the most popular person because that's what we all want to hear. Nobody wants to hear your success. Success is boring, but like how'd you lose that arm? That's a good story.
On that note, thank you again, Jim. This has been amazing.